Okay, everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for bearing with us. We're having a couple technical difficulties. I think we worked it out though. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alejandro Vivas. I am a public participation specialist for the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Hazardous Waste Management Program workshop. I wanted to go over a couple of quick things before we get started. As usual, just some housekeeping and some language options that we have available today. First off, for our language, if you look up at the screen, you'll notice that there are instructions for your desktop. We're using Zoom today, where you have the option of going down to the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. You can press that, and you'll have the options of using English or Spanish. If you happen to be phoning in today, go ahead and go over to your three dots and that say more. Press that and go down to language interpretation. There you can choose English or Spanish. Next slide, please. Again, we have a couple housekeeping items to go over today. Please use Google, Chrome, Safari, or Firefox as your browser today. That will make things run much smoother for our workshop. And we will be using the Q&A box to submit questions, or I'm sorry, to accept questions today. So please do not put your questions in the chat, rather put them in the Q&A box if you don't mind. Thank you. We also have the camera and microphone features for the attendees being disabled. And we will be recording this session, as all of our sessions and workshops have been recorded. If you happen to have missed one of those, go ahead and go back and check those out on our website. And please, we're going to go ahead and make a end of session evaluation available to everyone so that we can figure out what we're doing well and how we can improve. Next slide, please. Okay, and so in order to access our website, you can go ahead and go to our website at Hazardous Waste Management Plan. You can see that up on the screen, and Felice will drop that in the chat for everyone. Also, there you can join our e-list for updates and be continually apprised as to what we're up to. And you can email us at dtsc_hwplan@dtsc.ca.gov. And you'll notice up on the screen, there's also a QR code, which will take you straight to our website. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to Ryan Dominguez, our supervising hazardous substances engineer, and he is going to kick off today's workshop by going over our timeline.
All right, thanks, Alejandro. We're having some technical issues today. You got it? Okay. So our camera view is a little different given some of these issues with the AV equipment. So apologies for that. But I will go ahead and kick us off. Thanks once again for attending our workshop series. This is our 8th workshop of this series, and we developed this to provide ongoing public education and encourage continued discussions during development of our hazardous waste management plan. These workshops discuss focused topics that are based on public feedback that we've received over the last 2 years and provide additional information related to the development of the hazardous waste management plan. Each workshop has been recorded, so if you've missed any or want to view the presentations again, please visit our hazardous waste management plan page, the workshop page. The workshop dates and topics have been subject to change. They're pretty solidified now. We have 2 left, and barring any illness or other issue, we anticipate the 13th and the 20th will be the next 2 workshops coming up. So stay tuned for those. Next slide, please. We typically do a quick poll here, so let's go ahead and load the poll up. The poll is it's a couple general questions. It helps us gauge who's in the audience and what the knowledge folks bring to the meeting, and so it kind of helps us level set. That should load up here shortly. Maybe. Alejandro, is it just one of those days?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it just kind of froze on me there. So
And
bear with me here. There we go. Okay, thank you.
yeah, I can't. There it is. Thank you. And for some reason, I can't hear either. So, well, it loaded up, so we're good.
Thanks
So
for your patience,
we'll have
folks.
this going for 30 seconds or so, and basically, there's two questions. Have you read our 2023 Hazardous Waste Management Report, and have you attended any of our previous workshops? All right, let's go ahead and close that down, and I'll read off the results. Okay, so for the first question, have you read our report from 2023? 81% was no out of 59 respondents. And so we have a lot of folks that haven't read it. And then the second question, have you attended any of our previous workshops? Also about 81%, 48 out of 59. So that's that was no. So a lot of new folks here today. We love to see that. Thanks for coming and listening into this one. One thing I do recommend is background is reading the report. It'll help set the context for you. So I'll go ahead and give a little background right now, and then following this, please check out the report and the previous workshops, and it'll help context. So in 2021, Senate Bill 158 was approved, and it made changes to Health and Safety Code 25135. The changes require the department to complete hazardous waste management reports that will feed information into hazardous waste management plans. In 2023, DTSC published the first hazardous waste management report. And now we're using this information in the report to draft the first hazardous waste management plan by 2025. And the draft plan will be presented to the Board of Environmental Safety for approval. And then the cycle starts again. This is an iterative planning process. We're currently using the information in the report and the feedback that we've received over the last couple of years to develop the first plan. Now, this plan will include specific goals and recommendations that relate to the information that we are discussing throughout these 10 workshops. Next slide, please. Now, as a reminder, you can access our 2023 full report on our webpage. We recommend reading the full report and reviewing the appendices. Data from the report and your comments are being used to inform the development of the plan. Next slide, please. To provide a little reminder and context of what we're looking at, we've identified 4 areas of focus in the hazardous waste management report. And we identified these as areas of focus for planning. Today's presentation sits in the hazardous waste criteria focus area. As we heard a couple weeks ago during the waste criteria workshop, the hazardous waste criteria are used to identify hazardous waste and were developed with numerous considerations in mind. One of those considerations was based on how waste was disposed of in the ground and the types of facilities it was disposed in. At the time, landfilling was largely done at facilities that did not have liners or a way to collect leachate. Leachate is the term for water and other liquids that seep through the waste in a landfill and end up at the bottom. Next slide, please. So in late 2023, the Board of Environmental Safety provided our team recommendations for the hazardous waste management plan. One recommendation was to identify challenging hazardous waste categories and/or themes that may require broader policy or programmatic approaches and interventions beyond the purview of DTSC alone. Now, for example, the issue of transporting hazardous waste outside of the state. And the recommendation included a question that asked, how might the state handle the hazardous waste generated within the state boundary? So as we identified in our report, one of the largest waste streams is non-RCRA contaminated soil. Over half of this waste stream is shipped out of state for management. To address this recommendation and similar comments or questions we have received over the last few years, we began to more closely review landfilling practices, design, and operation. We found that landfilling practices have improved significantly over time. This has allowed some non-RCRA hazardous waste to be disposed of in non-hazardous waste landfills. As a reminder, non-RCRA hazardous wastes are identified as hazardous in California, but not by the federal system or other states. This is currently allowed because standards were developed that are alternative to full hazardous waste management requirements, and they remain protective. We'll discuss these improvements today and talk about development of alternative management standards for disposal of non-RCRA soil in non-hazardous waste landfills that have specific and protective design and operation standards. Now, this has the potential to increase access to protective management of these wastes in numerous areas of the state and decrease the need for out-of-state management. In turn, more landfills that offer protective disposal would be closer to the location from which the soil is generated. Now, this also in turn reduce the miles traveled for disposal and greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. Like I was saying, over the last few months, we've received comments and questions regarding alternative management standards for contaminated soil. Many of these comments were about operational and regulatory issues and concerns. To best discuss alternative management standards for land disposal, we've invited CalRecycle and the Water Board to join us today. We've really enjoyed coordinating the workshop with you, and we look forward to today's conversation. And please go ahead and take some time and introduce yourselves.
My name is Martin Perez. I'm an environmental program manager in CalRecycle.
I'm Brianna St. Pierre, and I am a geologist, senior engineering geologist with State Water Board in our Division of Water Quality.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, and I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. We have three main parts to our agenda today. First, we're going to discuss landfill operation over time and some of the regulations for modern landfills and the modern landfill operations that have greatly improved protectiveness. Now, in this portion, we'll talk about landfill practices of the past, the outcomes from those practices, and the resulting regulations. Next portion will focus on background information. We will review a few items from the 2023 report, discuss what alternative management standards are, and talk about a non-RCRA hazardous waste stream that is currently managed under alternative management standards. Lastly, we will discuss alternative management of non-RCRA soil and ask for feedback regarding additional considerations. Next slide, please. Before the introduction of more strict environmental regulations in the 1970s, land disposal practices were generally unregulated. Some of the typical practices during that time included things like open dumping, where waste was just dumped in open pits or low-lying areas without any containment. Facilities had a lack of liners and leachate control. The landfills were rarely lined with protective materials. Now, this allowed hazardous chemicals to leach into the surrounding soil and groundwater. And there were no systems in place to collect or treat leachate. This led to a lot of impacts. There was also a lack of long-term planning. Once soils were filled to capacity, they were often just abandoned with little or no post-closure care. The photo here on the slide shows hazardous waste at an illegal dump in Bullitt County, Kentucky. And it was known as the Valley of the Drums. These poor management activities occurred here in the late 1960s through the mid-1970s. Thousands of metal drums filled with various contaminants, such as heavy metals or volatile organic compounds, littered the property. Now, the Valley of the Drums provides an example of how hazardous wastes were managed in an uncontrolled situation before there was meaningful environmental regulations. Next slide, please. So what were the impacts from this? These early landfill practices led to significant environmental damage. This included groundwater contamination. So chemicals that leached from unlined landfills often entered into the drinking water supply. So there was soil and air pollution. Uncontrolled dumping and burning led to widespread soil and air pollution that affected ecosystems and human health. And that
tema y a la salud
led to
humana
public health risks.
que ha
Now,
llegado
these
a los
practices
riesgos públicos
significantly
y
increased
estas
things like the risks of cancer, respiratory diseases, and other health problems for nearby residents. Next slide, please. Another result of these poor management practices was regulation. The Solid Waste Disposal Act of 1965 was a key statute that specifically focused on improving solid waste disposal methods. Then, the United States Congress amended the Solid Waste Disposal Act with the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, in 1976. The requirements in RCRA established a cradle-to-grave system that regulates the identification, generation, transportation, treatment, storage, and disposal of hazardous waste. When DTSC talks about RCRA, we're typically referring to the management requirements for hazardous waste. However, RCRA is not just for hazardous waste. RCRA also includes requirements for the safe management of non-hazardous waste as well. Next slide, please. In total, RCRA includes 10 main subtitles or parts, A through J. And we're going to focus on just 2 of these subtitles today. Hazardous waste is regulated under subtitle C of RCRA. The program was designed to ensure that hazardous waste is managed safely from the moment it is generated to its final disposal. And this is what we refer to as the cradle-to-grave system. Subtitle C regulations set criteria for hazardous waste generators, transporters, and storage and disposal facilities. This includes permitting requirements, enforcement, and corrective action and closure requirements. Non-hazardous solid waste is regulated under Subtitle D of RCRA. Regulations established under Subtitle D ban open dumping of waste and set minimum federal criteria for the operation of municipal waste and industrial waste landfills, including design criteria, location restrictions, financial assurance, corrective action, and closure requirements. Now, in both programs, states play a lead role in implementing these regulations and may set more stringent requirements. California is an authorized state to carry out and enforce both RCRA Subtitle C and Subtitle D requirements. With that, I will pass it over to Martin with CalRecycle.
Next slide. I'll highlight a few bills that demonstrate the progression of solid waste enforcement. Starting with 1939, we saw garbage disposal districts, revisions being transferred into the newly created Health and Safety Code. Garbage disposal districts were areas designated by a city or county to provide collection and disposal services to residents and businesses. We also saw the prohibition of an operation of a crematory for destruction by fire of garbage or refuse in a city and county, and also more stringent laws on dumping of waste into waters. There was also an establishment of the first true sanitary landfill in Fresno, which you could also find in the National Registry of Historical Places. The landfill opened in 1937 and closed in 1987, and utilized a few firsts, such as waste compaction. Next slide. In the 1970s, the 1950s and 60s, there were a variety of amendments to the provisions of garbage disposal districts. But in the 1970s, there was a definitive movement to establish an overarching rule for the state in solid waste management focused on public health and environmental protection. In 1972, Senate Bill 5 established a comprehensive state solid waste management and resource recovery policy to protect public health, safety, and well-being, to preserve the environment, and to provide for the maximum reutilization and conversion to other uses of the resources. It also established a 10-member state solid waste management board to formulate and adopt state policy for solid waste management, including minimum standards for solid waste handling and disposal for the protection of air, water, and land from pollution. In 1976, we saw Assembly Bill 2439, which established local enforcement agencies and provided them with the authority to issue and enforce permits, including investigation and inspection authority. And we'll cover local enforcement agencies later on. In 1989, AB 939 established a comprehensive statewide system of permitting, inspections, enforcement, and maintenance for solid waste facilities, which included standards for solid waste handling and disposal, such as landfill cover, landfill gas monitoring, and control. The bill also required each county to establish an integrated waste management plan that included elements of source reduction, recycling, composting, siting, and capacity planning. Next slide. And then in the 90s, there was bills established to detail procedures for enforcement agencies and clarified processes and procedures and requirements for the designation, operation, and evaluation of these local enforcement agencies. Assembly Bill 59 made changes in the permitting and enforcement regulations, mandated LEAs to establish and maintain an inspection program with specific requirements. There was also an establishment of beneficial use of materials at solid waste landfills that would constitute diversion through recycling. And then in 2000s, bills were established to create a permit action process, as well as further strengthen and streamline enforcement. In 2010, the California Integrated Waste Management Board merged with the Department of Conservation's Division of Recycling to become the Department of Resources, Recycling, and Recovery, otherwise known as CalRecycle. And finally, 2016, Senate Bill 1383 established organic waste reduction targets to reduce methane emissions by diverting organic waste from landfills, although it's not an outright ban of organics disposal. That was a brief summary of the bills that discussed permitting and enforcement of solid waste. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And am I sounding okay? We're playing with microphone turning off and turning on. Thumbs up. Okay. Okay, we'll take no. Okay, cool. Thanks, Abel. All right, so that brings us to the second part of our agenda, background and alternative management standards. Next slide, please. In the 2023 report, DTSC included a finding related to disposal and non-RCRA waste. The passage on the slide is included in section 8.3.2 of the report, and it reads that if the soluble concentration of a constituent exceeded a certain regulatory limit, the waste could pose a potential hazard if not disposed of in a secure landfill. This phrase has a couple of key terms in it that I'm going to start with to help orient ourselves. Next slide, please. The first term is soluble concentration. Now, solubility is the amount of a solute that can dissolve in a solvent at a given temperature. The soluble concentration represents the amount of something that can go into solution. The term is important because it is one of the primary reasons we're talking about landfills. Now, for this, let's consider how coffee is made. Water passes through the coffee and extracts the flavors from the ground beans into the water and makes delicious coffee. Now, this principle works whether it's in drip form or in a cold brew. For landfills, this term relates to leachate formation. Leachate is the liquid that collects on the bottom of a landfill. Now, water can be introduced into a landfill in a number of ways, like rain or decomposing organic waste in a non-hazardous waste landfill. When this water passes through the waste in a landfill, some constituents in that waste can wind up in the water. Now, this will seep through the landfill and end up at the bottom. And this leachate is a primary concern for landfill operations. Next slide, please. Now, the second key term is secure landfill. This term was used in a document called the Final Statement of Reasons for the Hazardous Waste Identification Criteria. The Final Statement of Reasons is a document that describes the reasoning for specific regulations. Now, in this case, it was the Final Statement of Reasons for the Hazardous Waste Identification Criteria regulations. Now, a question came up during reporting that was about what a secure landfill was, because it was not defined in the Final Statement of Reasons or in regulations. Next slide, please. So we found that the term secure landfill is not commonly used today. However, it was a term that was used in the 1970s and 1980s. And we found that secure landfill would be one that is properly located, well designed, and this design would include features like a liner and a leachate collection and removal system. It would be well operated and regulated and is monitored. In short, it was a landfill that isolates waste from the environment around it. Next slide, please. There's also two other key terms that we should review. These are RCRA hazardous waste and non-RCRA hazardous waste. A state program must be at least as stringent as the federal program. It is allowed to be both more stringent and broader in scope. California's hazardous waste management program is both more stringent and broader in scope than the federal program. And we learned about some of the ways California is more stringent and broader in scope during the workshop on the hazardous waste criteria that are used in California. And these are the criteria that are used to identify hazardous waste. And we had that workshop on October 22nd, and you can find the recording of it on our website. So if you remember from that workshop, California uses additional methods to identify hazardous waste. Some of these methods are required by the RCRA program, and some are additional requirements that California has for the identification of these wastes. The result of this is that there are wastes identified as hazardous by the RCRA requirements and additional wastes that are identified as hazardous by California's requirements. RCRA hazardous waste is the term for waste identified by the federal government as hazardous. Non-RCRA waste is the term for additional waste that is identified as hazardous only by California. Now, these two terms are important to hold on to. Next slide, please. For the Hazardous Waste Management Plan, DTSC is required by Health and Safety Code 25135 to make recommendations for potential alternative management options for some types of non-RCRA hazardous waste. Recommendations for these wastes must remain protective of human health and the environment. Next slide, please. Alternative management standards is a broad category and can be implemented in different ways and includes specific requirements for management of specific wastes. Essentially, these are a set of alternative standards that allow management of a hazardous waste stream in lieu of full hazardous waste management requirements for non-RCRA wastes. 3 examples of waste that are currently managed under alternative management are universal waste, asbestos, and a third is treated wood. Next slide, please. We wanted to better understand alternative management standards. So we looked at to one of these wastes that was already allowed alternative management. Now, the example that we looked at was treated wood waste. Treated wood is wood that has been treated with specific chemical preservatives for purposes of protecting the wood against attacks from insects, microorganisms, fungi, and other environmental conditions that can lead to a decay of the wood. These preservatives often include one or more of the following constituents: arsenic, chromium, copper, pentachlorophenol, and creosote. The example of current alternative management standards for treated wood waste is very relevant. The alternative management for treated wood waste are defined in statutes Health and Safety Code 25230 through 25230.18. Standards allow handling of non-RCRA hazardous treated wood waste in accordance with a set of alternative management standards in lieu of the full hazardous waste management requirements. Next slide, please. There's a few different components to the alternative management standards for treated wood that include storage, accumulation, tracking, and disposal. And today we're going to focus on the disposal aspect because treated wood waste is allowed to be disposed of in a non-hazardous waste landfills. Next slide, please. I'll talk for a second on Health and Safety Code 25230.11. It includes the disposal requirements for treated wood waste. Now, these requirements allow treated wood to be disposed of in a composite-lined portion of a solid waste landfill unit that meet specific design requirements and is regulated by specific waste discharge requirements. A composite liner is the term for a liner that includes a plastic layer on top of a clay layer. Now, these two combined make the term composite liner. Additionally, it's important to highlight that modern land disposal facilities often have numerous landfills that are broken up into cells that can be designed in various ways. And so that's primarily why the statute specifies treated wood waste may be disposed in a very specific type of location with the composite lined portion of a landfill unit. We wanted to confirm the design of these landfills that accept treated wood waste. Another important function of a landfill system operation is leachate removal. So we also wanted to confirm that these landfills had that function. So if you remember, leachate is the liquid that collects at the bottom of the landfill. The leachate collection and removal system is designed to remove the leachate. It was not a surprise to find that these landfills did. have a leachate collection and removal system, and is required for Class 2 and Class 3 landfills that have a liner or accept certain types of waste. So in all, there are 59 landfills that are allowed to accept treated wood waste in California. Next slide, please. To confirm the design of each landfill, we turn to documents called the Joint Technical Documents, which discuss the design and operation of these landfills. I'm not going to go through all 59 of the landfills here today. However, I will briefly go through 3 examples of the kinds of designs that we saw. The specific designs varied slightly, but we keyed in on 2 elements: the presence of a liner system and a leachate collection and removal system. On this first example, you can see that there are 2 composite liners and a leachate collection and removal system, and these are indicated by the blue boxes. Just a little bit more terminology. Geomembrane is another name for the thick plastic portion of the liner. And the 60 mil, the MIL, that is the thickness of a plastic liner. And then the last piece is the HDPE. That's high density polyethylene. Next slide, please. Now, the second example also shows this double liner, as well as this one includes a leachate collection and removal system. Let's go ahead and go to the third one. Now, this last example includes a landfill that has a single composite liner and a leachate collection and removal system. So overall, this was a very informative review. As a reminder, landfills at the time that the hazardous waste criteria were developed largely were unlined and did not have leachate collection systems. So this review illustrated that landfill practices had become very different since the time that the criteria were developed. Next slide, please. This is a map that shows the 59 locations that are allowed to accept treated wood waste. The QR code on the screen will take you to a list of these facilities on the Water Board's website. And there's also another website to stay tuned to called the acronym SWIS, and Martin will talk about it in a few minutes. Next slide, please. To summarize, the alternative management standards for treated wood waste were established by a law. Included in these standards were specific requirements for the type of landfills treated wood waste was allowed to be disposed at. Specifically, the law says that when disposed to land, treated wood waste shall be disposed of in either a Class 1 hazardous waste landfill or in a composite-lined portion of a solid waste landfill unit that meets all the requirements applicable to disposal of municipal solid waste in California. These specifics include design requirements like a composite liner system, a leachate collection and removal system, groundwater monitoring. They must comply with waste discharge requirements. There's also other requirements like air quality standards and often limitations on the amount or the maximum amount of waste that a facility is allowed to accept daily, monthly, or annually. Oversight of these landfills is conducted by various agencies that include the US EPA, local air districts, local enforcement agencies, CalRecycle, and the Water Board. It truly is a whole of government approach. Now, we're happy to have 2 of these entities here with us today to talk more about their agencies and their role. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Martin with CalRecycle and Brianna with the Water Board.
Again, so my name is Martin Perez. I'm an environmental program manager in the Permitting and Assistance branch, which is within the Waste Permitting Compliance and Mitigation Division. and I've been with CalRecycle for 15 years. Just a little bit about CalRecycle. We can go to the next slide. CalRecycle brings together the state's recycling and waste management programs to move the state towards a circular economy that reduces waste and reuses all materials and takes resource conservation to higher levels. Next slide. CalRecycle has a mission, and that is to protect California's environment and climate for the health and prosperity of future generations through the reduction, reuse, and recycling of California's resources, environmental education, disaster recovery, and the transition from a disposable to a fully circular economy. CalRecycle is one of 6 departments and boards under the California Environmental Protection Agency. CalRecycle has 12 divisions and offices that cover a wide range of programs such as material management, local assistance, disaster debris recovery, beverage container recycling, circular economy, education and environmental initiative policy development. CalRecycle's waste permitting, compliance, and mitigation division, where I work in, ensures that solid waste processing and disposal site permits are processed and issued as required. Solid waste management operations are inspected, and local enforcement agencies are properly trained, certified, and evaluated. Next slide. CalRecycle regulations are covered in Title 14 and Title 27 of the California Code of Regulations. And Title 27 incorporates the federal requirements for Subtitle D of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act to ensure the safe disposal of municipal solid waste. Title 27 is a combination of CalRecycle and the Water Board's state minimum standards for active and closed landfills. And you could also find the full permit process requirements within that title. Title 14 sets the state's minimum standards for all other solid waste activities types, such as shipping and grinding, transfer processing, in-vessel digestion, construction and demolition, and composting. CalRecycle's regulations do not address air or water quality aspects of the environment. They do not infringe upon the Water Board's regulations, as they are not intended to be duplicative or in conflict. A little bit about the local enforcement agency program. The LEA has primary responsibility for ensuring solid waste facilities, such as landfills, are operating in compliance with the state's operating standards to protect public health, safety, and the environment. Local LEAs are designated by CalRecycle as the local agency responsible for enforcing the regulatory requirements for the management of solid waste. And the LEA can be a city or county, or can cover several jurisdictions. CalRecycle acts as the EA for jurisdictions where there is no LEA. LEAs are also required to ensure the permit and its supporting documents are kept up to date, accurately reflect the day-to-day operations of the site. In order to make sure landfills are operating in compliance with regulations, the LEA will conduct inspections at a frequency described in the regulations. Next slide. All solid waste landfills require a full solid waste facility permit, which is issued by the LEA and is concurred by CalRecycle. I'll cover a few of the components of a permit. You'll find key design parameters, self-monitoring program, prohibitions, terms and conditions. With regard to the design parameters, you'll find days and hours of operations, daily maximum tonnage, permitted area, site design capacity, and estimated closure date. And it also includes language with regard to prohibitions for types of waste that are not acceptable at the site, and also language that you can find, and also language on what can be allowed, provided it is identified in the joint technical document as approved by the local enforcement agency and applicable federal, state, and local agencies. Permits are reviewed at least once every 5 years, and the LEA is required to, at that time, may require the operator to make any necessary changes to their operating documents. The operator can also propose changes at this time. For the joint technical document, it includes a detailed description of the day-to-day operations, as well as closure and post-closure maintenance plans, and any operational and design parameters described that are consistent with the permit. You'll also find the facility owner and operator information, site plans, days and hours of operation, waste types and volumes, the site's capacity and life estimate, site life estimate, and also covers the operating criteria and controls. The operator can propose to make changes to the joint technical document to the LEA, and the LEA will determine the appropriate permit action pathway for those changes based on the level of significance. Notices to the public are made or are required by the LEA based on the level of permit action. The operator is also required to demonstrate how they will meet the performance standards for the proper closure and post-closure maintenance and the ultimate reuse of disposal sites in a manner as to protect public health, safety, and environment. Requirements for closure and post-closure include site security, final cover, final grading, slope stability, drainage and erosion control, landfill gas control, and also includes third-party cost estimates for closure and post-closure. With regard to final cover, there are requirements in place to ensure the proper waste containment to protect public health and safety by controlling at a minimum vectors, fire, odor, litter, and landfill gas migration. Requirements are in place to prevent ponding, erosion, and runoff. And the LEA can require additional measures for final cover if needed. Operators are also required to provide a plan and estimate for costs for a complete replacement of the final cover system as a result of a known or reasonably foreseeable occurrence, such as a flooding event, earthquake, fire, tsunami, etc. And that is to be prepared by a third-party engineer. An operator is required to demonstrate they have the financial resources in place to conduct closure and post-closure activities and to complete corrective action. Additionally, they're also required to demonstrate they can meet the regulatory requirements for operating liability. Next slide. Landfills must also demonstrate how they will comply with the operating standards for the management of solid waste, which is to be included in the joint technical document. Examples of operating criteria include standards for roads, lighting, staff training, site supervision, spreading and compaction, grading, and stockpiling of cover material. Controls can include nuisance, leachate, dust vectors, litter, noise, on-site traffic, and controls for hazardous waste and medical waste. With regard to hazardous waste, an operator must implement a program to detect and prevent disposal of regulated hazardous waste. And their program must include at a minimum random incoming load checks, record keeping, and adequate staff training. If hazardous waste was discovered, the operator is required to notify the LEA as well as DTSC and the Regional Water Board, and sites where hazardous waste is accepted and processed, precautions must be taken to eliminate or control dust, fumes, mist, vapors, or gases that may be produced in quantities that may be harmful to the public or to animals. Landfills need to maintain a sufficient quantity of cover material to perform daily cover. Daily cover is the placement of 6 inches of compacted earth and material on disposed solid waste at the end of each day. Earth and material can include contaminated soil as currently defined in the regulations, which means soil that contains designated non-hazardous concentrations of petroleum hydrocarbons. It could also include soil with contaminants other than petroleum hydrocarbons as approved by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, DTSC, and the Air District. Regulations also include alternative materials that can be used to cover disposed solid waste as approved by the LEA and concurred by CalRecycle. The storage and handling of material must be conducted in a manner to protect public health, safety, and environment and to control nuisances. A program must be in place to monitor landfill gas and to take any action to control the movement of such gas. Landfills must ensure that methane gas generated on site does not exceed 1.25% by volume in air within any portion of on-site structures and does not exceed 5% by volume in air at the facility boundary. The program is included in the joint technical document, as well as the preliminary and final post-closure maintenance plan. Next slide. A database. So the solid waste information system is a database that provides facility information and allows a user, including the public, to view and download documents. In order to access the Swiss document portal, members of the public must first need to create a web pass, and then after the web pass is obtained, the user can then use their signed-in credentials to access documents in the Swiss document portal. And with that, I will hand it off to Brianna.
Thank you, Martin. So again, I'm Brianna St. Pierre, and I'm with the State Water Board, and I am going to talk about all of the Water Board requirements. Next slide, please. So the Water Board includes the State Water Board and the Regional Water Boards. And the State Water Board is located at our headquarters building in Sacramento. The Regional Water Boards we have 9, and they are based on watersheds, and they are shown here. Together, we work together for the Water Board's mission to preserve, enhance, and restore the quality of California's water resources and drinking water for the protection of the environment, public health, and all beneficial uses, and to ensure proper water resource allocation and efficient use for the benefit of present and future generations. Next slide, please. The State Water Board sets statewide water quality standards. We issue statewide general permits, which we also refer to as orders. We conduct statewide surface and groundwater monitoring assessment, develop regulatory tools, and we provide support and we coordinate with our Regional Water Board staff to implement our statewide orders. Next slide, please. The State Water Board, I call this working in the same sandbox. We work with our federal, state, and local agencies, as well as other environmental agencies. We do a lot of coordination and communication with interested parties, and who are just trying to work and get their job done. And we work a lot with our regional water boards, our other water board offices and divisions, who are also just trying to get their job done. And we do kind of a coordinated, collaborative approach so that we can all just do our jobs. Next slide, please. The regional water boards, the staff there review the individual permits. They are the ones who are looking at the joint technical documents that Martin referenced. They will write the individual permits. They will also do agency coordination within their own regions. They do public outreach also within their own regions. They're the boots on the ground performing the inspections. They're reviewing individual reports, and they will also be the ones who do enforcement actions within their regions. Next slide, please. The Water Board's authority or purposes here come from the Federal Clean Water Act, the California Water Code or Port of Cologne, and also California Code of Regulations Title 27 for the Land Disposal Program. Next slide, please. Martin mentioned this earlier. Title 27 is a shared regulation. It's California's way to implement the subtitle D requirements mentioned earlier. There's specific sections assigned to each agency intended to have a consolidated regulatory approach with clear division, with authority to avoid any overlap or conflict or duplication. Under Title 27, water boards regulate discharges of waste to land to ensure protection of water quality. It includes minimum standards for regional water board requirements to incorporate when they're regulating solid waste disposal. Next slide, please. Title 27 includes requirements for construction of containment structures, such as landfill waste management units, for non-hazardous waste and other waste that have been granted a DTSC variance, like we talked about treated wood waste earlier. Title 27 includes requirements for monitoring. There's going to be different design and monitoring requirements depending on the nature of the waste that's being discharged and the site conditions. The requirements are going to be incorporated into each landfill's waste discharge requirements or order or permit for the protection of surface and groundwater quality and beneficial uses. Next slide, please. When the alternative management standards for disposal of treated wood waste were adopted under Section 25230 of the Health and Safety Code, these standards specified that if treated wood waste was not going to a hazardous waste landfill, it could go to a non-hazardous waste landfill if the facility met certain criteria. So those standards basically meant that treated wood waste can't just be disposed anywhere or in any landfill or even in any landfill cell. It must be disposed in a treated wood waste approved landfill. So it could be a Class 1 hazardous waste landfill, or a regional board could grant authorization for disposal at a non-hazardous waste landfill through the landfill's permit. The waste discharge requirements could specify that treated waste could be disposed within a composite-lined waste management unit mentioned earlier that is equipped with a leachate collection and removal system. The waste management unit where treated wood waste could be disposed, it has to be designed in accordance with Title 27 and must be executing a monitoring and reporting program. That monitoring program will include requirements for detecting any releases, characterizing any, and responding to any releases from the waste management unit. Next slide, please. So when a regional water board is going to be issuing a permit, there must be submittal of monitoring reports from the discharger. The monitoring and reporting program has to include provisions for purposes of detecting, characterizing, and responding to releases. All landfills that have been authorized by the regional boards to accept treated wood waste must meet the requirements and provisions within the monitoring and reporting program. Under Title 27, there are 3 components of a monitoring program. There's detection monitoring, there's evaluation monitoring, and there's corrective action. The default monitoring program is detection monitoring. The goal is to detect a release from a unit at the earliest possible opportunity. This monitoring includes a combination of routine monitoring for a few indicator parameters, and then much more extensive analysis for other parameters every 5 years. If there is evidence of a release, the landfill must move to what is called evaluation monitoring. That's to determine the nature and extent of a release from the facility. What has been released? How far has it traveled? Was it even released from the facility, or did it come from a different source? If the facility is found to be responsible for that release, then the landfill needs to move into what is called a corrective action plan. And that is to assess the effectiveness of their cleanup actions. Just one thing to note, if a facility accepts treated wood waste and there's verification of a release from the waste management unit that contains treated wood waste, the landfill is no longer authorized to accept treated wood waste within that unit until corrective action measurements occur and the release has been mitigated. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to point out this really neat tool that we have. We mentioned the map earlier. This we developed as a way to look at all of our active landfills within the state. There's an option to filter by waste types that are accepted. Is open to the public. You can search by radius from a certain location and the types of waste that could be received at a particular facility. If you were to click on any one of those icons, it will give you links to the water board's GeoTracker file. It will also include a link to the CalRecycle Swiss database ID that Martin mentioned earlier. And it's just a really useful tool. We try to develop a lot of tools to make things easier for people to access. And with that, I will turn it back over to DTSC. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, before I move on to the agenda,
You're actually muted, Ryan. We can't hear you.
still muted. Sorry, I was talking to the room here. So I was just saying, before I move on to the next part of the agenda, I was just looking through the chat, and there was questions about if we were receiving comments or how to submit comments. You can use the Q&A feature on Zoom today, or you can send it to our email, which was dropped in the chat here. So those are probably the two best ways to do it today. And in the future, you can email us. Those are the best ways. If you are interested in submitting a question or a comment today, we are, after this portion, we're going to open it up to questions and discussion. So just wanted to answer that directly in the just from the chat. Okay, so back to the agenda. So we're on the third part of our agenda. Considerations for alternative management of non-RCRA soil. So I'm going to first talk a little background, and then we'll talk about considerations for alternative management. So next slide, please. So here's a chart that compares the top 3 waste streams that are generated in California to all other all other hazardous wastes. So we've discussed this chart many times in the past, in some of our past workshops, and it is discussed in more detail in our report. From the bottom of the chart to the top, you can see inorganic solid waste in orange, used oil, and that's waste oil or mixed oil, and then contaminated soil. These are the top 3 waste streams. And then finally, after that, in blue, are all other manifested hazardous waste. So as you can see here, contaminated soil is the largest. Most of this waste is non-RCRA, and about half of it is shipped out of state for disposal. So let's look at this waste stream a little closer. Next slide, please. So contaminated soil is consistently the top waste stream that's generated in California. We found that over 90% of the waste is non-RCRA hazardous waste. So as a reminder, non-RCRA hazardous wastes are identified as hazardous in California, but not other states. Next slide, please. Contaminated soil comes from a few different sources that include cleanup sites and construction type projects. This can range from housing developments to cleanup projects that use excavation as the selected remedy, to the construction of a stadium, or burying power lines underground for forest fire protection. Now, we took a look at 1 year of data for hazardous waste soil. This figure splits out the top 20 generators of soil from 2021. The largest generator you see here was soil generated from a utility upgrade project at a wastewater treatment plant in San Francisco. Now, the soil was generated at this plant from when they were drilling holes for pilings for seismic design and foundations. In order to better understand the hazardous constituents that were in the soil, we reached out to the top 5 generators and asked if they would provide their waste characterization sampling data. And when we took a look at this data, we found that the soil primarily was identified as hazardous because of heavy metals like lead. Next slide, please. Now, since a lot of this waste is managed out of state, we also calculated the average distance from the generator of the non-RCRA soil to the destination. This was about 320 miles and is typically transported by truck and sometimes by rail. For the soil transported by rail, it has to get to the train. So a truck is used to move it from typically, every once in a while, they're along a line where they can load it directly into the train, but it seems to be not very often that happens. So at a site where they're excavating, they will excavate, load it onto a truck, then that transports it to a train, and it goes off to its disposal facility. Next slide, please. As I discussed at the beginning, landfilling practices have improved significantly over time. These improvements have allowed some hazardous waste to be disposed of in non-hazardous waste landfills. This is currently allowed because standards were developed that are alternative to full hazardous waste management requirements and remain protective. Additional waste stream appropriate to consider for alternative management is contaminated soil. Alternative standards would allow non-RCRA soil to be disposed of in an appropriately designed and operated non-hazardous waste landfill. Next slide, please. Now, we've heard a number of concerns regarding alternative management for contaminated soil over the last few months, and we've taken those concerns back and combined them with the information gathered regarding other wastes that are currently allowed alternative management. Now, as such, alternative management standard considerations for non-RCRA contaminated soil should include location requirements, design requirements, operational requirements, and monitoring requirements for media like groundwater and air monitoring. Next slide, please. Now, based on our review, development of alternative management standards for disposal of non-RCRA soil in non-hazardous waste landfills could be appropriate in landfills with specific and protective design and operation standards. This has the potential to increase access to protective management of these wastes in many areas of the state, decrease the need for out-of-state management, and address a number of comments, concerns, and recommendations that we've heard. This could also reduce the miles traveled for disposal and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, we're hoping for your feedback on additional considerations that should be made. And with that, I will go ahead and open it up for discussion.
All right, Ryan, it looks like we've got quite a few questions here in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and read them out as we have in past workshops. That way we have them as part of our transcript and they are translated. So the first question.
I have to unmute the speaker. Sorry. Mine is unmuted, I think. Alejandro, I can't hear you yet, so.
You cannot hear me.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Alejandro, can you hear, or can you speak now, and then we can see if we can.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Apparently through the chat, the participants can hear me. Okay, great.
Yeah, so my computer's being weird today, and so.
Yeah, thanks folks for bearing with us. We're obviously having a couple technical issues today, but we'll get through. So the first question is coming from Cynthia Babbage. We have a terrible landfill, Gardenia Sump, number 4, Alpine Village. Torrance, California with no liner. How will you be cleaning it up? How will polluters pay?
I'll take that one. Cynthia, actually, after we talked last week, I think one of our enforcement group is involved somewhat. I'm looking into it more. I don't know much about that facility in particular in that situation. So I'm working to find out some more information. But I don't have it I don't have that information today, and so it's a bit off topic too for the purpose of this workshop today. And so I can look more into it and get back to you. I think you're also working on it, so I can try and put you in contact with the enforcement folks that I heard might be working on that one.
Thanks, Ryan. From an anonymous attendee. If DTSC is concerned the non-RCRA hazardous waste is being shipped out of state, shouldn't the agency be asking themselves why that is occurring? The real reason is not just a matter of landfill distance. The waste is being shipped out of state because it is cheaper for the generator, and it is cheaper because the 2 hazardous waste landfills in California are subject to numerous regulations and monitoring requirements, and those costs are being passed on to generators. DTSC itself sent its hazardous waste to Arizona instead of utilizing the California hazardous landfills they are tasked with permitting. It was not an issue of capacity, but costs. If DTSC will not pay the higher costs for a higher quality landfill, why should any of the generators in California?
Well, first, thank you for the comment. We touched on the out-of-state transport and disposal a little bit in our report. Cost was one factor, but also just a facility is under no obligation to accept a waste, and so they don't have to provide a reason. They could be one of the 2 hazardous waste landfills in the state could have some kind of maintenance going on that doesn't allow them. They could be booked out already to receiving a certain amount of waste per day and disposing it in a certain cell, or they could be just booked out and not available. Those are a couple of the other reasons that we've heard that it might be transported out of state. So there's a number of them, including costs. So I don't remember what page that is in our workshop, but we did have I don't remember what page number it is in the report, but we did have a workshop that touches on that as well in the past. We talked about it in the report workshop.
Okay, and from Shreyashi Sharma, given that each landfill site has unique environmental conditions such as local air quality, groundwater tables, and proximity to residential areas, what specific toxicology and health risk assessments will the DTSC conduct for each individual site to evaluate potential impacts? Do you want me to read that again? That was quite a wordy question.
Yeah, please.
You don't have it in front of you, Ryan. Given that each
Please.
landfill site has unique environmental conditions such as local air quality, groundwater tables, and proximity to residential areas, what specific toxicology and health risk assessments will DTSC conduct for each individual site to evaluate potential impacts?
Thanks for reading it again. I can't speak to the specific like toxicological studies that would be done. I can speak to just general considerations that we're looking at when our location requirements that could include geology, geography, design requirements, so liners, leachate collection, the operational requirements, and monitoring requirements. So those are 4 categories of considerations, broad categories that Yeah.
So I can't speak for DTSC, but I think that's part of what DTSC is looking for input on. So if you have specific considerations on what you think should be considered for this effort, then I think DTSC would want to hear about those concerns.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Eric Nolan. What sort of public notification is required if a release is detected?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that you.
Testing to see if I had feedback. Okay. The answer is it depends on what is required in the facility's permit. Some are required to do some public outreach to the community if there is a community nearby, but that may not necessarily be a requirement in all of the landfill permits. And so it really is dependent on the site for water board permits.
Thank you. We've got another question from Shreyashi Sharma. Has the DTSC considered implementing additional monitoring for airborne particles and surface water contamination at non-hazardous waste landfills designated to receive CalHaz waste beyond the standard groundwater protections? If so, what measures will be taken?
This is don't say echo. So Ruby, I think you were asking about non-hazardous waste landfills designated to receive CalHaz waste, so non-hazardous waste beyond the standard groundwater protections. And so if you have additional monitoring requirements that you think might be appropriate, that's what we're asking for today is to provide feedback on if anything above and beyond the current monitoring that occurs. That's what we're hoping for feedback on.
From an anonymous attendee. As illustrated in the map shown by the Water Board, Subtitle D landfills tend to be within close proximity of residents and would have a closer receptor pathway for environmental exposures to those around these landfills. The Subtitle C landfills in California have groundwater, air quality, and soil monitoring requirements. How does DTSC plan to address the monitoring gap for the residents who are around those Subtitle D landfills? Will Subtitle D landfills be subject to monitoring at the same extensive level that Subtitle C landfills are subject to under Title 22 regulations?
I'll start and then I can pass it. So the Subtitle D landfills, and as Brianna and Martin were talking about, do have fairly significant monitoring requirements under Title 27, and that's in California's Title 27. The specifics of that I can let these two speak to. So I'll pass that along. That's why we've invited them here, is because those specific landfills are their purview and the LEAs and local air districts. So I'll pass it over.
Right. So just to add to what Ryan said, and not to get into specifics of every single landfill, but all of the landfills within California are required to have monitoring for groundwater. There could be leachate vadose zone monitoring, there's air monitoring. There are extensive monitoring requirements for all landfills in the state of California. Not sure what additional information you would like because they're going to be really site specific on where those monitoring points are. So maybe if you have additional specific questions, you can follow them up with another chat.
And then
Thank you.
just to quickly add for CalRecycle solid waste facility permits, like I mentioned in my presentation, there are self-monitoring programs in place for each landfill within their permit. And there could be specific site-specific monitoring that needs to be done within their program. It's identified either in the permit or described in the joint technical document or both. And those part of that monitoring program is reporting to the local enforcement agency on the findings that that are made at a frequency, usually on a monthly basis, or if not more frequent. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. From Veronica Aguirre, how are landfills able to operate with expired permits?
I'll take that one. Veronica, I'm gonna. I think it's best to point towards our permitting program. If you have specific questions about expired permits and any facilities, I recommend reaching out to them very broadly. And if a facility applies to renew a permit within a certain period of time of the expiration date, they're allowed to continue operating on the permit that they are operating on. So that permit is essentially continued until a decision is made on to renew or not renew the permit. That's a short answer. So if you want additional information, I recommend reaching out to our permitting group.
And well, for solid waste facility permits, they do not expire. They're reviewed every 5 years. There could be a condition in place consistent with a local permit that may have a restriction on how long they can operate or a cap on site capacity. But with regard to the solid waste facility permit, it's once it's issued, it does not expire.
The permits issued by the water board also do not expire.
Thanks, folks. And please remember, for those of you that are speaking, the other ones that are not, to please mute their mics because we're getting a little feedback.
Sorry.
So we're having to change things up. Thanks for your cooperation. Okay, so from Faith Bautista, we have a question coming in. For communities that may experience increased traffic and emissions from transporting hazardous waste to new sites, what steps will the DTSC take to assess and mitigate the cumulative environmental impacts of these additional stressors on local air quality and public health?
So if you have recommendations for that or things that you would like us to consider, please go ahead and submit them. We're trying to field these considerations today. And one of the questions that I had interest in general is I understand that the current permits have, or the allowances on certain facilities have daily, monthly, or annual limits to what they're able to access through the air district. And so that's what I've been looking at right now because it's a good question. And so please, if you have considerations that you want us to look into, please submit them and we can take it back.
From Michael Caprio, in the event alternative management standards are proposed for non-RCRA contaminated soil, what would the timing of the associated legislative process be relative to the release of the waste management plan in Q1 of 2025? Would it be initiated after completion of the workshops associated with the release of the HWMP and address the final proposed alternative management standards that have been vetted as part of the review of the first draft of the HWMP release?
I don't have a good timeline on it right now. To be short, so I can't. I'm sorry. I can't speak to the timeline of it right now.
Okay, from Eric Nolan, more of a comment. I've seen the four waste type chart discussed many times, and the statement made that contaminated soil is the largest of the four waste streams. However, as I see the chart, contaminated soil appears to have steadily decreased over the last several years, and other hazardous wastes have increased significantly. So I often wonder why DTSC always identifies soil as a primary focus when there seem to be other wastes overtaking soil.
Eric, that's a good question. For contaminated soil, it fluctuates year over year. We haven't been able to identify it as any specific trend. And one reason, or one cause of that, I think, is economic. I don't know if we can go back to a specific slide. Let me see if there's a good one that we could look at to illustrate it. If we go back to slide 54. One more. Yeah, there you go. So this is the amount or quantity of contaminated soil generated in California since 2010 through 2021. So it kind of goes up and down, and I think a lot of that is economic, driven by economics, given what this is generated from development, construction, remediation, when cash is available to do that. And so when those projects grow or increase, we think there's a trend. And when there is not as much money available for those types of projects, we think it goes down. That's why when we look at this in 2021, you see a significant drop, and you see that from 2019, 2020, and 2021. Well, that's probably due to COVID in the 2021 year timeframe. So some of these trends, you kind of have to step back a couple of years from 2021. Then if we go to slide right before this, 53. There you go. Thank you. Contaminated soil is in the gold bar. And so this is it compared to all other waste. So the inorganic solid stays pretty consistent on the bottom. Then you have used oil, and that one is actually reducing over time. And one of the things we think is going on there is that electronic vehicles are being used more, and they don't have oil. So we think that's part of that reduction over time. The gold or the orange goldenrod, I don't know what the proper color is for that. It's the second from the top. That is the largest waste stream each year, and that's contaminated soil. The blue at the top, that's all other hazardous waste combined. So all other waste streams. So hope I answered your question, Eric.
From an anonymous attendee, on slide 39, is the requirement for gas air monitoring only for landfill gas or also for VOCs if found in the landfill?
That's with regard to landfill gas.
I will also note that there are VOCs found in the Vado zone, then the water board will require monitoring for VOCs as well.
From an anonymous attendee. Do DTSC, CalRecycle, and the Water Board intend to allow Subtitle D landfills to use non-RCRA hazardous soil as alternative cover?
It is a consideration, disposal or alternative daily cover. If you have a recommendation, please feel free to you can send it to us separately, or you can make a comment.
From Ruby Sybil, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Has the DTSC considered implementing additional monitoring for airborne particles and surface water contamination at non-hazardous waste landfills designated to receive CalHaz waste beyond the standard groundwater protections? If so, what specific measures will be put in place?
I think it's a similar question, Ruby, I think you asked a similar question previously, or there was one that was asked previously. If you have recommendations for us to consider, go ahead, please submit those. Right now we're looking at the requirements of Title 27.
Shreyashi Sharma. As an individual from the community, my question seeks to raise concerns relevant to us. For communities that may experience increased traffic and emissions from transporting hazardous waste to new sites, what steps will the DTSC take to assess and mitigate the cumulative environmental impacts of these additional stressors on local air quality and public health?
I think it's a similar similar response from that last one. Thank you for the questions. If you have recommendations for us to consider when looking at the alternative management standards, please submit them and comment on that.
From Charles White. What will be the next step in considering and publicly discussing possible further alternative standard for soils and other hazardous waste? More workshops, time frame, opportunities for public review and comment?
Thanks for the question. I don't. I'll talk more generally about the time frame that we have for planning. Right now, we're drafting the goals and recommendations, and then the next step is to submit it. Oh, I'll wait for the slide. Oh, the next step is to present the draft to the board in March 2025. After that, the board is required to present it out in 3 locations around the state. I anticipate that will be done throughout the summer next year. The purpose of doing that is to receive comment and feedback from the public on the draft plan for consideration by DTSC and the Board of Environmental Safety. Charles, I hope that was helpful. Alejandro, if you were speaking, I think you were muted.
Oh, yeah, I don't know how that happened. My apologies. Let me try that again. From Cynthia Babbage, rephrased. How do you tackle legacy landfill sites pre-1970s?
Cynthia, I'm not sure. There are a number of legacy landfills that are under DTSC's purview. I'm not sure if there's any under Water Board or CalRecycle. I'll have to look at that and get back to you on it. I don't know.
From Chip Gribble. Hi, Chip. Will an archive of this webinar be available afterward? I wasn't able to join until late.
Hey,
And
Chip,
yeah, I can.
yes.
Yes,
We'll have this loaded on our website along with all of the other workshops that are currently posted.
Thanks, Ryan. Sorry about that. From Donald Greenlee. How do you manage potential release of VOCs from landfill to nearby neighborhoods?
That's going to be addressed in the facility's corrective action plan. It's going to vary depending on the facility.
I think you're muted.
From Vanji Paragas, thank you. How is the department planning to proceed with the alternative management standards for non-RCRA soil? Is this in the works already? Is there a proposed timeline?
Hi, Vanji. We don't have a specific timeline right now. This is part of the hazardous waste management plan. So as I was talking about a few minutes ago, the next steps for that, right now we're drafting our goals and recommendations. The next step is to submit the draft to the Board of Environmental Safety, and that's due in March 2025. And then they take it and present it out in 3 different locations in the state to receive comments for both DTSC and the board to consider. So right now, we're here collecting information for considerations that should be made for alternative management of contaminated soil.
Thanks, Ryan. From an anonymous attendee. Is there a concern that leachate from the subtitle D landfills will begin to exhibit hazardous characteristics? Is there a consideration of how this leachate will then be managed and the capacity for managing hazardous waste leachate within the state?
So I'll try and answer. Do you? I'll try and answer. If it does begin to exhibit a characteristic as hazardous waste, it must be managed as that leachate would then have to be managed as a hazardous waste.
Right, so there are requirements for monitoring leachate, monitoring the characteristics of that leachate, and that sort of feedback is exactly what we're looking for today. Thank you.
From Sterling Heavenstraight. Shipping of toxic waste out of state is fine in the case of Arizona if the distance is less than it might have been from the waste facility site or lack thereof in California. The amount of energy to transfer the waste is most likely less than from San Diego County than it would have been if it transferred from, say, Central California to Arizona. Therefore, if a facility in California won't take waste or are not obligated to, then legislation to ensure they do, or the creation of a new landfill. Also coming from Sterling Heavenstrite, I believe this is connected. It says, additionally to the comment, what would be the associated cost benefits in a new facility versus shipping?
Take that as a comment, and thank you, Sterling. Oh, there's a follow-up too.
Yeah, so the follow-up to that is, additionally to the comment, what would be the associated cost benefits in a new facility versus shipping?
Sterling, I don't know the answer to that question comparing the two.
From Paul Savala. Number one, how will the DTSC ensure that in-state non-hazardous waste landfills receiving CalHaz waste meet the same operational, monitoring, and containment standards as California's hazardous waste specific facilities?
Thanks, Paul. As what we were talking about earlier today was we started with the reason why non-RCRA waste was required to go to a hazardous waste landfill. And we pointed to the term or to the final statement of reasons. Now, if you remember from that part of the presentation, the final statement of reasons is a document that explains the reasoning for certain regulations. Now, the term or the what was said in that final statement of reasons was, thus, if the soluble concentration of a constituent exceeded a certain regulatory limit, the waste could pose a potential hazard if not disposed of in a secure landfill. So that's kind of regulatory speak. So let's summarize it a bit. If a waste was sent to a landfill that was not properly designed and operated, then it could pose a risk to groundwater. So back when they wrote this document, or when the hazardous waste criteria were established, they were talking about landfills that had no liner, no leachate collection system. So they weren't designed appropriately. And they also weren't operated appropriately, mainly because of the design issues. Over time, the requirements for landfilling have improved. And as we went through the discussion today, these landfills have the treated wood waste landfills that we were showing an example of have liners. They have, in some cases, a double composite liner, in some cases single. They have leachate collection and removal systems. They have monitoring, post-closure care. So there's a number of things that have improved. And so those requirements, compared to what the requirements were when the hazardous waste identification criteria were put in place, are what we're comparing. And so no liners and leachate collection to liners, leachate collection, monitoring, oversight. And so that's what we're looking at.
This next one is more of a comment. It comes from Sterling Heavenstrite. Or the requirement for an existing facility to integrate internally versus shipping externally. Shipping adds pollution and may be a burden of costs for other states. Thank you, Sterling. From Veronica Aguirre, the Avenal landfill has been operating without a permit. Thank you. Thank you, Veronica. Coming from Charles White, do you anticipate that SW landfills allowed to accept some types of HW will be subject to added standards or simply allowed to operate under existing standards? How and when will this level of detail be discussed in the plan?
Clarify in that question, the SW is solid waste landfills, I'm assuming, but HW would be hazardous waste landfills or hazardous waste. So do you anticipate that solid waste landfills allowed to accept some types of hazardous waste will be subject to added standards or simply allowed to operate under existing standards? How and when will this level of detail be discussed in the plan? Right now, we are, Charles, I don't know the answer to the specific question if they will be subject to added standards. I think it would depend on the waste itself, the characteristics of it, what it is. And I've said today, I don't know that I have a specific timeline about that level of detail. So I know that's not as much information as we can provide, but if and when we do determine more information, if and when we do develop more information, we will disseminate that out.
From Charles White, how will possible changes in air quality impacts be factored into the alternative management standards for allowing hazardous waste to eligible for solid waste LFs? Landfills, solid waste landfills, sorry about that.
If you have a specific recommendation, that's what we're hoping for. I mean, it's a good question. If you have any thoughts or recommendations on that, please submit them.
Coming from Sterling Heavenstrite, those limits Mark mentioned for a facility receiving waste could be means for increasing CalRecycle methods for increasing process management. Energy considered their major concern is one for the private sector. Partnerships at the ground level ensure a progressive, stabilized environment. Less often means more.
Thank you, Sterling.
Coming from Florence Garibian, pre-regulation landfills should have more attention. We have at least 2 of the landfills. They pose different serious problems. We identify them as legacy sites. From Veronica Aguirre, can you please send us your presentation?
Yes, Veronica, that is already loaded on our website. It's available there for download. We'll also be posting the recording of the workshop, hopefully in about a week.
From Eric Nolan, comment for the record. It's vital that members of communities near operating landfills be aware of the operations, monitoring, releases, and mitigations at landfills. A more robust communication process should be a part of the plan. It appears that the current situation is permit specific. Communities need a more consistent approach. As well, interested parties outside of the community may also have an interest. The map that Brianna showed may be a good data resource for landfill status, releases, etc. Thanks for that comment, Eric. Coming from Sterling Heavenstrite, of the largest hazardous waste streams, do you have data on methane released or other gas emissions available? I think that slide would help greatly. I know eGrid, EPA have power plant emissions, but do DTSC have data that can be published?
Sterling, we don't have that specific information. Uncontained gases are not identified or not considered hazardous waste. They're regulated under another agency. And so I don't know that we would have those. Some hazardous waste generators might, but I can't speak to which ones those may be. You guys.
I can, we may have, some reports published on CalRecycle's side, so we can find that and share that if you do.
Okay.
Coming from an anonymous attendee. DTSC and the Air District require Subtitle C landfills to cover non-RCRA waste daily to prevent wind dispersion. The AMS should not allow Subtitle D landfills to use this material for alternative cover due to issues of wind dispersion and airshed. The requirement should be equal amongst the landfills. In addition, it should not be allowed during rainy seasons to prevent stormwater from contacting the waste and potentially contaminating stormwater.
Thank you. Thanks for the feedback.
Coming from Florence Garibian, a full investigation is needed, groundwater contamination, also mitigation evaluation.
Thank you, Florence.
Coming from an anonymous attendee, are the landfill operating requirements mentioned on slide 39, example, landfill gas monitoring and controls, applicable to unpermitted pre-regulation hazardous waste dump site?
Yeah, I have to look at the regulation and get back to you on that. Just not, I don't have it handy right now.
From Veronica Aguirre, the Avenal landfill is located in our community and we are burdened with the odor nuisance coming from not only the garbage, but the soils received. What can our community do?
Veronica. Right. I can't, I don't think we can speak to that specific situation. Right now, what we're doing today is asking for feedback on this topic for alternative management. And so we can probably, I think we can get the best contact for you to address those specific questions for that specific facility. So if you have your contact information available to us, I think we can follow up on that.
Charles White, yes, helpful, but hoping there would be another iteration through workshops such as this one. Also from Veronica Aguirre, the Albanal landfill is very close to our community and uses leachate for dust control and their misters. How can we request a health study to ensure the process is safe and isn't the cause of the number of health issues in our community, the number of health issues our community faces?
I think this question and the next one, Veronica, we'll have to find the best contact for that specific facility. So the next question was, members of the community have reported problems with rodents and other vectors. Could it be possible leachate could be the cause of the infestation? So again, Veronica, it's not the scope of this workshop, so we'll find we can get the best contact and for you on those questions.
From an anonymous attendee, STLC criteria addresses leachates, but VOCs in soil gas and air are also commonly found in many landfills. Will gas collection system and monitoring be required in these situations?
Yeah, I think, well, I would speak on behalf of the CalRecycle's regs. gas collection system is required for all landfills in regard to this specific topic. I mean, that's something that could also be considered with regard to contaminated soils. Thanks.
From Sterling Heavenstraight. My comments are for future legislative sessions, the use of EV heavy machinery equipment. Charging heavy machinery by day or night will soon be attainable with or without utility solar, but certainly must be a consideration to offset emissions from transporting of hazardous waste. By example, a physical train or trucks having a megawatt energy storage systems will soon support medium haul transportation. Thank you for that comment, Sterling. Coming from an anonymous attendee, why is DTSC not allowing for public comment today? What has DTSC done to specifically outreach and engage the actual communities that will be impacted? Will DTSC be holding in-community meetings and notifications? What outreach are you doing to EJ and low-income communities to solicit feedback?
Thank you for the questions. We are receiving public comment today. If you want to submit more comments, please send them to our email. If you have specific recommendations for considerations, please send them in. As far as outreach and engagement, we've been, so throughout this whole process, this project and process began in 2021 with the passage of SB 158, which amended the requirements for our statutory requirements. Our project formed, and we put out the first hazardous waste management report. During the summer of 2022 to 2023, we held a number of workshops related to the reporting and the quantities of hazardous waste generated, the transportation of it, where it ends up, and a number of other topics were covered in that report. And we held a number of workshops throughout that process, talking about some of our findings along the way. And then when the report was finalized, we presented out in a couple of different workshops there. And we held a number of other workshops this year, and this is our 8th workshop of this series. In addition, we've also attended a number of symposiums or conference. Some of those have been EJ Symposium. And we have talked to some individual environmental justice groups. So that's been some of the outreach that we've been doing. I hope that answers your question. The next few steps are to submit the draft of our the hazardous waste management plan to the board in March, and then they will take it and present it out in 3 different locations around the state to receive comments, feedback for consideration for that plan. So there are additional opportunities to comment on all of the subjects within that hazardous waste management plan, the draft, coming up. So there are 2 more workshops that we have for this in this round. They're on different subjects. Next week's is on environmental justice and advancing environmental justice. The week after that is going to be discussing a few regulatory changes to the hazardous waste criteria that we're recommending related to the ignitability criteria. So there are, sorry for the long-winded answer, there are additional opportunities for engagement coming up.
Thanks, Ryan. I also just wanted to point out that in the chat, just to clarify that I had mentioned that there was no formal comment period, or there was no formal comment. And I guess what I meant by that when I put that in the chat was that we were not holding a formal comment period as we would, for 30 days or something on one of our cleanup sites. So I just wanted to make that distinction that we are taking comments and questions, but it's a little bit different than our usual format for a public comment period. Just a little distinction in our process. From an anonymous attendee, is DTSC considering any relief from manifest fees for waste site cleanups that are CalHazardous? For example, legacy burn sites. The manifest fees are going up and will prohibit our county from doing any legacy waste cleanups, clean closures of former solid waste sites to prevent health and safety impacts.
Good question. I'm going to point you to the fees website. There was a workshop that was held, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago on the subject of fees. And it talked about a number of various exemptions or exclusions. And so I'm going to point to that. It's the best source of information. I can't speak to this question in particular. I don't have that information. So I would look there for the most complete.
Okay, comment from Sterling Heavenstraight says, thank you, Mark Alejandro. Thanks to you, Sterling. We appreciate you participating in today's meeting and providing us with plenty of feedback. The next one I'm actually not going to read out loud because it is a participant providing their contact information for us to go ahead and contact them again. And finally, from an anonymous attendee, can air quality experts be included in future workshops? This could help us understand community impacts with odors.
That's a good question. Odors are a subject that I certainly don't have expertise in, as it's a non-hazardous waste landfill issue. Yeah, you go. Oh, no, I know. Okay.
And then we do have one participant with their hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute them. We have Shreyashi Sharma. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. So
let me note that down.
Okay. That's again Shreyashi Sharma with a comment. Okay, go ahead and speak when you're ready. You should be.
I'll go ahead and address this last comment. I'll read it, Alejandro. Can you
Okay.
repeat the information about the recent meeting discussing hazardous waste generator fees? Yes, there was a workshop on the hazardous waste generation fees, and they're drafting regulations and requesting information about certain pieces of it. One of those pieces is talking about the exemptions and exclusions, and they're asking for feedback on the types of information that might be available to confirm that an exemption or that someone does qualify for an exemption or an exclusion. I don't remember, and I don't have off the top of my head all of the different exemption or exclusions that are being considered. However, that information is available on the fees website. You can find that, and I can send it your way, or we might be able to drop it in the chat. But the quickest way to find it is DTSC's fees. I think Googling that will probably get you there real quick. And please put it in the chat. So I think that should work. Yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing on the odor situation. There's a couple things that happen with that. The first is all of the landfills have an operating permit with the local air district. And so if you have concerns about air quality, the local air district is going to be a first phone call or contact for those issues. The second is odors are considered a nuisance condition, and all landfills with permits issued by the regional water boards have language in there regarding nuisance conditions. So if you are experiencing odor impacts, please contact your local regional water board. And if you need that information, please let me know. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Shreyashi, who's got their hand up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Shreyashi, and you can go ahead and submit your question.
Alejandra, I haven't seen any more come in. More
Okay.
or questions or comments? And we are also 6 minutes over.
Okay, and it looks
we
like
go to the next
Shreyashi
slide.
put her hand
I'll
down.
just go ahead and
Their
wrap
hand
up,
down.
and we'll see if any additional things pop up. So as a reminder, there's 2 workshops left for hazardous waste management planning. We have Advancing Environmental Justice, Examples and Opportunities for Integrating Environmental Justice in DTSC's programs. That's November 13th. And then on the 20th, we're going to be talking about some analytical test methods and updates that to some regulatory references that we'll be recommending. And next slide. For further information on this project or to review our report, please visit our website. You can get there by the QR code, or our web address is on the top. You can, I think right now it's best to email us. There's some issues going on with our e-list system. So please go ahead and email us if you have additional questions. And next slide. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you for attending and all of the feedback, questions, and concerns. If you have additional questions, concerns, suggestions, recommendations, please send them to us. I will call it. And thank you again, everybody, for attending. And thanks for helping out with this. Look forward to working with you in the future.